We've only discovered 5% of the ocean, which means there's still 95% of the ocean to discover. So who can say that mermaids don't exist when we don't even know what the other 95% of the ocean holds? Hi everyone and welcome back to a new video, my first video of 2023. I'm not sure if I can still say it, but I want to wish you all a happy new year with a lot of love and of course health. I already recorded this video, but unfortunately it did not record my sound, so I have to redo it once again. But that doesn't matter because then I know the information even better, so hopefully this video will be better than the first one I did. And for my first video of 2023 I wanted to pick up my series again, which is called The Myths of the Sea. I already covered The Flying Dutchman and also Blackbeard, and this subject has a connection to them, and the subject I want to talk about today is mermaids. They are often described as beautiful creatures with angelic voices. They enchant men with their song and send them to their untimely death. Or they are kind-hearted and help men when they are drowning and they are shipwrecked at sea. As you already can hear, there are many different stories when it comes to mermaids, and I will discuss all the stories, or at least a big chunk of it, during this video. Of course, I can't tell everything because there is so much information, but I will try to tell you as much as I can, or at least the most interesting things I can find on the internet. There are many different mermaid types, there are many different myths, legend, folklore, and even facts. And I will try to cover it all in this video. I'll discuss some famous stories, fairy tales, myths, legends, and real life evidence if there is any. And I'm a big fan of mermaids. I always loved mermaids even when I was little. I had mermaid clothes, I had dolls, I watched H2O, Just Add Water, and I also watched The Little Mermaid and Peter Pan. I always loved the Mermaid Lagoon scene when it came up. And I also loved to draw mermaids, especially because they don't have feet, and feet are terrible to draw, but I love the way their hair moves in the water and how their fin moves. It's very elegant, and of course I love their voices. I love singing as well, so I always felt very connected to mermaids. And as always, before I start this video, I'd like to point out that I'm not an investigator, historian, or anything like that. I just love making videos and I search the internet for information. I always try to compare my information to other information that I found. But of course, sometimes there can be an error, and you can let me know in the comments if I said something wrong, but I hope you're gonna enjoy this video anyway. So without further ado, let's dive into it. It is hard to give a description when it comes to mermaids. There are so many stories and different descriptions about their appearance, but the most common one is also the one you see a lot in entertainment, which is the fair-skinned maiden with long wavy or straight hair and the lower body of a fish. With their beauty and their voice, they would lure sailors and they would drag them to the bottom of the sea. They could also cause storms, floods and drownings. But in some other cultures, a mermaid could be a blessing, a good omen for seafarers. The mermaids would save those who were lost at sea, show them the way, or they would save them with their kiss. They could even fall in love with humans. Mermen are also mentioned sometimes, but most of the time people talk about mermaids. And the most famous aquatic male creature is of course Poseidon or Neptune from the Greek/Roman mythology. He ruled the sea with his trident. Together with the mermaids, the mermen are referred to as merfolk or merpeople. And many different cultures have different stories and depictions of mermaids. The ones I mentioned before are mostly from European stories and myths. And most of them were inspired by the Greek/Roman mythology. But the first account of mermaids was found as far back as 1000 BC in Assyria, which is now known as Syria. In their mythological stories, they mentioned the beautiful goddess of fertility called Hecate, who cast herself into a lake and transformed into a mermaid. The mermaids that are described in ancient Greece are the mermaids that are close to the mermaids that we know of today. And with that I mean the mermaids that we draw and the mermaids that we see on the television. And one of the folk tales was that the sister of Alexander the Great, named Thessaloniki, was transformed into a mermaid. She lived in the Aegean Sea until she died around 259 BC. She would look for ships, and if she saw a ship, she would ask the sailors a question. She would ask them if King Alexander, so her brother, was still alive. If they would give her the right answer, which was, "He lives, he reigns and conquers the world," she would let them be. But if they failed to give the right answer, she would cause a storm that would drag the ship and its sailors to the bottom of the sea. Another story, one from mythology, depicts the mermaids quite different. They were called the Sirens. First they looked like human-headed birds, probably influenced by the ba bird from Egyptian mythology, but their look would change over time. And the story of the Sirens was first told by Homer in the Greek Odyssey. But Homer did not describe the appearance of the Sirens. He only described that they tried to seduce Odysseus, a Greek hero, and his crew with their song. I already covered this story in my video about Esvedra in Ibiza. And if you want to see that video, I'll place the link in the description, but for now I will give a small summary of the story. So in the part that they encounter the Sirens, they reach a rocky island. Odysseus was traveling with his crew back home from the war in Troy, and when he traveled home he saw a witch named Circe, and she gave them wax to put in their ears when they would come across the Sirens on the islands, so that they could not hear the song and not be seduced. But Odysseus refused to put the wax in his ear because he wanted to hear the song of the Sirens. But of course he didn't want to be lured by them, so he asked his crew to bind him to the mast, and he also asked his crew to put the wax in their ears. He also told them that if he asked to be freed, that they should deny his request. And when they reached a rocky island, the Sirens were already waiting for them. For the crew, who had wax in their ears, they looked like vicious and ugly monsters. But for Odysseus, who could hear their song, they looked like Helen of Troy, and they had the voice of the Muses. He wanted to jump in the water, but of course his crew didn't listen to him, and he was still tied to the mast. So the Sirens failed to lure Odysseus and his crew, and they could continue their journey back home. So as you can hear, there's not really a description of their looks in this story. Apollonius of Rhodes was the one who described the Sirens as part woman and part bird in his epic poem Argonautica. Eventually these stories were combined, but not for long. The Sirens would change in appearance during medieval times. They were depicted as the mermaid that we know today. Probably to give them a more appealing look, because let's be honest, half human, half bird doesn't really look good. This look would hardly change during modern times, because it's still very present in our modern conception of mermaids. And these mermaids would be a very big part of Germanic folklore and myths. We will leave Europe and look at other cultures, because mermaids were all over the place. In Africa there were sea creatures which were called the Mami Wata, which means the mother of water. The origins of her creation are likely to originate around the coast of Guinea. She is one of the most prominent water spirits of African folklore. She even had other deities that worked for her. They would deceive and kidnap fishermen to offer them to her. She is described as a beautiful black woman with black flowing hair and a fin-like tail, quite like the European variant of a mermaid. In Zimbabwe, the mermaids are called the Njuzu, and they live in rivers and lakes. When a person goes missing around these areas, they are said to be kidnapped by the Njuzu. For now they are very dark creatures, but in Chinese culture they are seen as beautiful and kind-hearted beings. They can turn their tears into pearls, and they are gentle and kind. They warn sailors for storms and they save them instead of causing them. And this is also the case with Korean mermaids. They are very similar to each other. They were mostly lonely and tragic figures who would sacrifice themselves for love. But in Japan they thought differently about mermaids. When a dead mermaid would wash up on the shore, they thought that it would bring warfare to their lands. And they also believed that if you would eat a mermaid that you would become immortal. They were seen as evil beings and it was better to avoid them. And the last type of mermaid that I want to discuss is the Yawkyawk. I really hope I pronounce it right. Which is a word in the Yawkyawk language of the Western Arnhem Lands. I'm really sure that I did not say it right, so my apologies for that. And the Western Arnhem Lands are in Australia, and the translation of Yawkyawk is young woman spirit being. They are also very similar to European mermaids, but they are seen as spiritual beings and they live in rock pools and freshwater streams. They also have a tail of the fish and very long hair, but they were also able to walk on dry land. They did this mostly during the night to avoid being seen. The Aboriginals believed that all animals were humans in the beginning. And when the landscape, the plants and the animals were created, they believed that all the humans would change in their animal forms. Of course, with some of them remaining a human. And some of them changed in the Yawkyawk. At first they would travel the lands as a human to find an aquatic place, and there they would change into the Yawkyawk. Today some of the Aboriginals still believe that they exist. There are sacred locations in Australia where they are believed to live and hide from the humans. Of course there are many more countries with their own depictions of mermaids, but I've compared them and most of them are similar to each other. They are either kind-hearted or they are evil and deceitful. And yes, I already told you a lot about that, so I will go to the next subject. Folklore and mythology can never be considered as the truth. It's just something you believe in, some stories you have heard. But mermaids were not only mythological beings, they were also very present in fairy tales. And the most famous story is of course The Little Mermaid by Hans Christian Andersen, which is called De Lille Havfrue in Danish. And it's one of my favorite fairy tales. But at first I only knew the Disney version. But if you know the real fairy tale by Hans Christian Andersen, it's darker. The mermaid does not live happily ever after with her prince, but she sacrifices herself for love, which is quite similar to the Asian depiction of mermaids. Unlike in the Disney story, all the mermaids are allowed to go to the surface when they turn 15, but only for one day. And the sisters of the Little Mermaid already went and they told her about the surface and she was really thrilled to go herself. When it's finally the time of the Little Mermaid, she goes to the surface and there she sees a big ship with a handsome prince on it. But then a storm comes and the ship sinks. The mermaid decides to save the prince and bring him to the shore. A young woman comes and she finds the prince and the Little Mermaid goes away. But the prince is still unconscious when he's brought to a temple, so he doesn't know who truly saved him. The Little Mermaid returns to her home and she tells her grandmother all about what she had seen. But her grandmother advises her to forget about the humans. The only way that a mermaid can gain a soul is when a human loves her so much that his soul would split into two, so that she would get one as well. But this would never happen according to her grandmother. But the Little Mermaid can't forget the human and she decides to visit the Sea Witch. The Sea Witch can make a potion for the Little Mermaid that she can turn into a human. But if she would walk on her feet, it would hurt like hell. So it would be very painful for the Little Mermaid to become a human. And of course, the witch also wants payment, so she asks the mermaid for her voice. And the mermaid had a beautiful singing voice, but she was really willing to sacrifice her voice and her fin for the love of her life. If the prince would love the mermaid so much that he would marry her, she would gain an immortal soul. But if he would not love her, she would die and turn into sea foam. The mermaid agrees to it and gets a potion from the sea witch. She says her goodbyes to her sisters, grandmother and father, and she goes to the surface to drink the potion. She falls unconscious and when she wakes up, she sees the face of the prince. He had found her and he asks her where she's from, but she can't answer because of course she lost her voice. He takes her with him to the palace and they grow very close. Everyone at the palace thinks she's so beautiful and very kind. The Little Mermaid feels very hopeful, but then she finds out that the prince has fallen in love with the girl who found him on the beach. He thinks that that's his true savior, and we all know it was actually the Little Mermaid. And Then they are gonna get married. The Little Mermaid realizes that she has not gained the love of the prince and she's gonna die soon. Her sisters come to visit her because they heard about her faith. They tell her that they went to the sea witch and that they exchanged their hair for a dagger. If the Little Mermaid would plunge the dagger into the prince's heart, his blood would change her feet into a fin again. But when the Little Mermaid visits the prince at night and she sees him sleeping with his fiancée, she can't do it. She still loves him so much, she doesn't want to hurt him and she wants him to be happy. She throws the dagger into the sea and she dives overboard to turn into sea foam. But then her spirit floats up in the air and she becomes a daughter of the air. As a daughter of the air, you don't have a soul, but you are able to gain one. So in the end, the mermaid is finally able to gain a soul, even though she cannot be happy with her prince. So as you can hear, this story is much darker and even tragic. I don't know which one I prefer, because I really love the version where she is happy. But on the other hand, this is also a realistic case, because sometimes you love someone and they don't love you back and it won't change. I know that from experience, so I feel more connected to the real story instead of the Disney one. But of course the Disney one makes you happier and satisfied, so I love both of them. And her statue can be seen in Copenhagen on a rock in the harbor. It is iconic and it's a major tourist attraction. Another fairy tale that includes mermaids is the story of Peter Pan by G.M. Barrie. They live in the shallow waters of the lagoon in Neverland. They really enjoy Peter's company, but they are not very fond of other human beings. They are also beautiful and have gifted singing voices, but they are also very vain and unfriendly. They love playing tricks on others and splash them with their fins. During the day they are not very dangerous, but when the moon comes out they turn into darker creatures. Even Peter Pan doesn't come near them when the sun has set. The lagoon is considered dangerous during the night. The last fairy tale I want to discuss is the story of the Entangled Mermaid. I'd never heard about this story, but when I was looking up mermaid fairy tales, this one came up. And the funny thing is that it's actually a Dutch story. And I'm Dutch for the people who don't know it. But it was written by an American called William Elliot Griffiths in his collection of Dutch fairy tales. In this story, the mermaids are also described as very vain. They spend all day looking at their own reflections and reveling in their beauty. They live in a pond and they are separated from the mermen. They can only see each other once a month during the full moon. But one day, one of the mermen broke this rule and visited the mermaids during one of their parties. He swam towards the queen and he warned her that the humans were coming to drain their pond. All the mermaids were in shock, but the queen was not impressed. She thought that the merman wanted to show off and wanted to be seen as a hero. She dismissed him and even got angry that he broke the rules. But the next day, when she woke up, panic broke out. Everything that the merman said became reality. The pond was being drained and fishing nets were thrown into the water. The queen was captured and her home was gone. She was put on display in a water tank while the humans were watching her. Not long after that she died, full of regret. If only she had listened to the merman, she could have found a new home and lived a happy life there. So these are some of the mermaid fairy tales, and I already covered myths and legends. But what about real life evidence? Is there any real life evidence? Are there any stories that can be confirmed? There are people who claim to have seen mermaids in real life. And these claims did not start recently but go as far back as the 2nd century AD. And before I start, I want to say that there is no evidence that could give us clarity, but they are very interesting stories anyway, so I want to share some of them with you. There was talk of mermaid corpses washing up the beaches of Gaul in the 2nd century. And Gaul, also known as Gallia, was a region of Western Europe in that time, which is now known as present-day France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, and parts of Switzerland, Germany, and northern Italy. So actually where I live right now. The governor of Gaul even wrote a letter to the emperor of the Roman Empire, August, about this strange event. which makes this story more believable. Another person who claimed to have seen mermaids is one of our favorite pirates, Blackbeard. He wrote about mermaids in his logbook. He wrote that he thought that it was possible that mermaids could exist because he believed that he and his crew had seen some of them. He instructed his crew to stay away from certain charted waters because he was sure that there were mermaids waiting for them to lure them. So the most fearsome pirate had a fear after all. Even the famous explorer Christopher Columbus was said to have spotted 3 mermaids off the coast of Hispaniola in 1493. But unlike most people, he claimed that they were not beautiful at all. He said that they had a lot of masculine features on their faces. Nobody can say what Columbus saw, but many historians think that he might have seen sea cows or manatees. And I agree that manatees are not elegant and beautiful creatures, but they are cute anyway. And the sighting that I'm gonna talk about now is very interesting. It happened in 1943 during the Second World War on the Kai Islands in Indonesia. The local villagers of the Kai Islands already knew about this creature that was living in their waters. They called the creature the orangikan, which translates to manfish. When there were Japanese soldiers stationed on the islands, they were very skeptical about this story. They said it was just a myth, an old folklore tale that the villagers started to believe. But very soon they would discover that the villagers were not wrong about this orangikan. A group of Japanese soldiers were just hanging out on the island when they decided to explore the island and visit the lagoon. It seemed normal until they saw some movement in the water. Out of the blue, the orangikan jumped out of the water on a rock. It was around 150 centimeters tall, had spikes on the spine, shoulder and back, and he had a light pink skin and the mouth of a carp. He also had 2 frog-like long fins and long arms. It was making gurgling noises and it was very hostile towards them. Then they noticed another creature swimming in the water. It came closer and closer and didn't look friendly either. Out of panic, the soldiers started to shoot at him. This scared both of the creatures and they disappeared. A sergeant named Mr. Tao was summoned by the soldiers and he saw the creatures with his own eyes. He wanted the villagers to capture these creatures so that he could show proof to the world, but this did not happen. Even after the war, he wanted the scientific community to search on the island for the creatures, but this did also not happen. The last story I want to discuss is a mermaid sighting on Kiryat Haim beach in Israel. This happened in 2009, which is not that long ago as all the other stories. Everybody wanted to uncover the mermaid sighting. The public, the media and even the government were involved. NBC even claimed that they had footage of the mermaid, but nobody has ever seen it. A creature was spotted several times on Kiryat Haim beach doing tricks in the water. It looked like a young girl and she visited the beach for days. It took a while for the news to spread, but eventually it reached the government. They wanted to investigate it and they issued a reward of 1 million for the person who could prove that the mermaid was real. But it had to be very solid proof, not a fake picture or video. NBC heard the news and they got their own film crew together to film on the beach. They did everything that they could possibly do. They filmed during the day and also during the night, in the waters and on the beach, in the hope that they would see the mermaid and capture her in their footage. Eventually, on one late night, one of the crew members claimed that he had seen the girl swimming in the ocean. They tried to follow the figure with their cameras, but this failed completely. They did not have the solid proof that the government wanted. They only had some footage shot by bystanders and by their own crew. And of course it was 2009, so the footage of mobiles and of video cameras were not as good as they are right now. They transferred the footage to the Center for Coastal Ocean Research in Los Angeles. And we haven't heard any conclusions since. And of course there are many other mermaid encounters, but these were the most interesting ones in my opinion. So I have to conclude this video, although I feel like there is no conclusion to this video. We've only discovered 5% of the ocean, which means there's still 95% of the ocean to discover. We still find new sea creatures now and then. Creatures that we did not know existed 100 years ago or even a week ago. So who can say that mermaids don't exist when we don't even know what the other 95% of the ocean holds? All I can say is that mermaids have intrigued us for centuries and they still do. I really love them and I think they are very magical. Even if they are real, which I don't believe, but maybe you do. They are always one of my favorite creatures, especially with their beautiful looks and their singing voices. And I really loved making this video and finding information about them. But for now, I think mermaids are not real because I haven't seen evidence that can convince me. I haven't seen a skeleton, I haven't seen a real life mermaid. And I'm a very scientific person. I always want to see if something can be proven, but I really hope they are real because they are very cool. So let me know what you think. Do you think mermaids are real? What is your favorite story? Is there another story you know about mermaids that I haven't covered? And my next video will be about Anne Frank and her family, who betrayed her and what happened to her, what was her life like. If you have another subject for my channel, you can always put them in the comment section. I also don't know which video I will make for my next Midst of the Sea video. So if you know a nice subject for that as well, you can also put it in the comments and let me know what you think. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.